I've really enjoyed our time together as a church, keeping the main thing the main thing. We've been talking about no reason to hide, standing for Christ in a collapsing culture. And the main point of this series has basically been Jesus does what politics can't, right? He saves the world and eternity forever. So don't put your hope into politics, put your hope in Jesus. And some of you have expressed concern about politics, either that I should talk about it more or that I should talk about it less. And I know, guys, I have been not perfect at this. I've been trying my best to copy Jesus and Paul. They talked in the Bible a great deal about how using politics and political figures was what they did to point people to God. And I haven't been perfect at it, but I've been doing my best. And I just love being a part of a church. Maybe the last place in America is the church where people with different political perspectives come together, united by who we're for, not what we're against, which is Jesus. And as we wrap up this series, I've got a point that is moving in a different direction. It's a nice dessert. It's much more introspective than the rest of the message set has been. I want to ask you, have you ever said, I will never do this thing. I will never again become that. I'll never be jealous again if I just get this thing. I'll never be lonely again if I could just get married. If you've been married, laugh. I think it's interesting, all the I'll nevers that we utter in our life. I'll never compromise my values, never. If you are a Christian, you might have said, I will never betray Christ. I'll never commit idolatry. If you're married, maybe you said, I will never cheat on my spouse. And what's interesting is how many of our all nevers we break, right? Many of us were raised in church and we said, I'll never walk away from my faith. I'll never wander away. And then we wander away. And today I want to talk about why that happens, why we have compromised our all nevers. And even if you're not a Christian, I think you're really going to enjoy this practical message on living a life of conviction, consistency, and principle for what matters most. If you want to know why we compromise on the things that are most important to us in life, you're going to want to lean into this message. And in a very classic structure, I'm going to tell a story, we're going to look at some Bible, and I'm going to make 3 points. And I want to start with a story. A couple of months ago, I ended up having to daily drive our spare car. We kept a third car because I like to drive beaters, and when you do that, you need a spare car. So I had a 2003 Chevy Suburban with 270,000 miles on it. And, so it still has some life left because it's an LS Chevy, it lasts forever. But it was a real beater with the heater, you know what I mean? It had no AC. In fact, it had questionable heat, so I'm just going to call it a beater, no heater. It had, and this is the worst part about driving beaters, is it had totally destroyed seats, especially the driver's seat. I mean, it hurts your back. You sit in it, and the seat was just completely hoofed. And everything inside was broken. Really, it was a tetanus shot on wheels at this point. You know what I mean? Multiple times, my kids had kicked their feet through the rocker panels with sandals, and I literally had to get them tetanus boosters because of this truck. There are still stains on my driveway from the rust from this vehicle. Literally, that's true. But of all the things, like its seat heaters were often stuck on in the summertime, which was a problem. You know what I mean? It's like, wow, I wish these were off. I wish the windows would also work, but they don't. So lots of problems. But the thing that really bothered me about this particular vehicle was the blown brake lines that would happen frequently. And I can remember 3 or 4 times where this particular truck, the brakes would blow. And you guys don't know the stress level of having a truck with brakes where it's like, are they going to work? You know what I mean? It's like, are they going to work? Deer season, when the deer are in the rut, it's like, this is scary. And the worst part was I had to cut the emergency brake line because it was seized, right? So now, and when you blow a brake line, it's like you got to shift her into first, and sometimes if, the split reservoir, you blew both sides of it, you just got to shift her into first, shut the engine off, and when you get real slow, shift it into park. That's not fun. That's not fun. So I said to my wife, and I don't know, you guys ever been married, but when I'm desperate, I'll go to Kristen and I use this line, baby, please. Baby, please. Some of you think I'm the cheap one in our family. That's not true. My wife is so tight, she squeaks when she walks. You know what I mean? She's so cheap, she could rub 2 nickels into a quarter. She's so cheap. I say, baby, please, this thing, it's had an engine knock its whole life, but now, I'm really scared for my life. I'm scared about the community. If I die, I'm going to heaven, but this truck is a danger. It's a menace to the community. She said, fine. So I went out on the lookout, and I found a mint condition Ford Expedition. And I bought it. And this thing, it's low miles. It's one of the lowest mile cars we've ever owned, 173,000. miles on it. For us, that is like barely broken in. It's got brand name tires. Usually I get, tires from Vietnam or whatever that are like bubbly and whatever else. These tires, Continental tires. Continental, sounds luxurious. It doesn't have that much rust. It shifts super smooth in all the gears except first to second, and even that's only once in a while. And it's only ever been in one very serious accident, right? So I paid real money for it. I thought, when I went car shopping, I don't know if you guys have looked at the used car market recently, but I was like, what happened? I mean, it used to be I could buy a car for $75 and have fun for an afternoon when I was growing up. You know what I mean? You go drive it around the fields and whatever else, and then, wreck it for fun, right? But I thought surely I'd get a towable vehicle for $5,000. No way, right? I mean, I paid $9,000 for this, and I thought it was larceny. We're broken right now. I mean, it's just unbelievable. But you guys, here's the tertiary benefit is I have been rolling. You see me rolling, okay? You see me around. I feel so great. I put on my Super John glasses, and I feel good driving this thing in the community, and you look out if I'm coming because I'm a bad driver, but I can't believe how nice this car, everything works almost, and, the seats have very few rips in them, and most of all, this is what I love, is I can push the brakes and fully expect it to stop. That is such a relief. I did not know the level of anxiety that I had that was released when I got a car that has brake lines that are decent. And I really look forward to driving places. I do. This thing just saws away the miles. It is a joy to drive. I love it, right? Now, Elise went on her staff and her husband, Dakota. They actually have a truck the same year. Here they are. They're parked side by side. And to be honest, this was one of my favorite parts about getting this truck because I just thought, I really respect Elise and Dakota, and Dakota's a successful, businessman and whatever else. And I just thought, how cool is it that I've got a vehicle like they drive, like what they drive, right? It felt really, really good. And they almost look exactly the same, right? The only difference, let me show you, just very slight different words on the back. Hers says platinum, mine says limited, and hers is way dirtier. You know what I mean? I thought that's great. But, what's the difference? Mine is limited edition. I thought, you can't get nicer than what I have. You know what I mean? Mine's got leather. Okay, how can you get nicer than leather? It's got, seats in it, and hers, I bet, has seats in it too. And this is what I thought. I thought, this is my forever car. This is my forever car. I will never want for anything nicer. I'm done. Well, this last Sunday, I had to drive her platinum to move it in the parking lot for a thing and a reason. And it was one of the worst things that's ever happened to me. I got in, and that leather was so much smoother. Check out this picture, okay? My leather is like plebeian. It's like sandpaper. I didn't know there were different levels of leather. Did you guys? It was so much more plush. I couldn't believe it. I said, oh, platinum. Okay, this is platinum. And then the suspension, I actually looked it up. She has a suspension on her car that adjusts over 1,000 times a second. I thought, what? And this is so much smoother. It was so smooth. It was like riding on a cloud, way more quiet. And this is so sad. But on the way home last Sunday night, after driving her car, I was back in my leather seats, which were like sandpaper on my Japanese tushy. It's just, we're driving on what felt like an old cobblestone road in London, compared to her car. My car's bouncing all around. It's just, and the sad part is I'm not exaggerating. I actually felt this way. I said, I'll never want, and then I want. And that night, this is so sad. That night, I went on Facebook Marketplace and just started looking at platinums just to see, what I missed. What's wrong with me? Have you ever said, I'll never, and then you did again? It just happens in our life. It's like, how did I get there? And in a matter of months after getting that vehicle, it reminds me of this story in the Bible. Our text today comes from the first 5 chapters of the book of Daniel. And it's just a fabulous read. If you want to know how to read your Bible this week, just this week, read Daniel 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. They're really short. They're super good, riveting read. But it's about this guy named Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. He was the king of Babylon. I know that's a big, long name. You can just think of Nebi or Neb when I say Nebuchadnezzar. But many of you know about his story. Some don't. He's a bad guy. And when he conquers other lands, what he does is he takes the best and the brightest back to his country. He destroys their land, but he takes the best and the brightest back to his country to be his wise men, his cabinet of advisors. And he takes 4 Jewish boys named Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, and Daniel. Their stories are kind of woven together. And he has these dreams from God that only the Jewish captured boys can interpret for him. And normally as a kid, you hear these stories and you look at these Jewish boys who stood firm in their faith. And you think, well, that's who I need to be. I need to be like those Jewish boys. That's who I want to be like. And a lot of churches around the country are doing sermon series just like this one. We didn't plan it out, but obviously we're thinking alike. There's a good time to talk about standing firm in your faith. And they talk about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But as I was thinking about this sermon series, I don't relate to them as much. I read their stories and I relate to Nebuchadnezzar far more. And here's why. I've never had my homeland conquered by a foreign power. I've never been taken captive against my own will to a distant land. And I've never had my life actually physically threatened if I don't worship a false god. But I have been so wealthy and free and successful simply as an American citizen, I can basically do what I want. And seriously, I think about our health levels, you guys, the quality of our homes. I mean, what we get to eat. We can have food from around the world. Yesterday, my family had sushi, which, I did not take part in. It's my mom's 77th birthday today, and we ate some food from her homeland, which shrimp are like the cockroach of the sea. Gross, I'm not doing it. But our freedom of choice, it far more reflects Nebuchadnezzar's life than that of the Jewish boys, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. I relate to it much more. And so I want to look at Nebuchadnezzar's story for a moment. He starts off having this gnarly dream. And he knows that many of the wise men from many of the lands that he conquered are kind of shady. They just tell him whatever he wants to hear to not get in trouble. And so he goes to his wise men. He says, hey, listen, I've had a bad dream. I know that it is not for me. It's a supernatural dream. I want you to interpret it, but here's the catch. I'm not going to tell you what it is. You have to interpret it for me, but so that you won't trick me, you have to interpret my dream. And if you can't do it, I'm going to kill you all. So that's not good. And they don't like that. It says they respond, the king's demand is impossible. No one except the gods can tell you your dream, and they do not live here among the people. But Daniel, he knows the one true living God. And God reveals the dream to him, and he says, wait, don't kill us all. I actually can interpret your dream. And so he does. And it blows everybody's mind because he does it perfectly. Nebuchadnezzar, his mind is blown. And I want you to see his response. It says, the king said to Daniel, truly, your God is the greatest of gods. And then this is really important, the Lord over kings. Nebuchadnezzar is a king, and most kings, great kings of that day and age, believed that they were deities. They were gods. And so what he's doing, he's professing his faith, saying, your God is Lord even over this king, a revealer of mysteries. For you have been able to reveal this secret. It's sort of a profession of faith. Have you ever had a moment like that? Have you ever had a moment where you see I know God is real? Nebuchadnezzar, he had this moment. He's like, man, if you held me at sword point, I'd serve God forever. I know he is God. I'll never doubt again. And have you ever had one of those conversion moments? Your life is just changed. Nebuchadnezzar's life, he is switching up his radio station. He's listening to Elevation Worship, Forrest Frank all the time. Isn't his music catchy? I love that. He's listening to, he said, I trust in God, my Savior. That's who he is. That's who he is. That is who he is. He's really into it, Same God. That's what I love / relate to / hate about Nebuchadnezzar's story. He's just like so many of us, right? He has moments that are powerful. They give him a cogent spiritual clarity. He knows that God is real, and then he just fades back. It's like, I love God. I will never deny God. And he just fades back. I want you to check out what happens just 2 sentences later. So we end chapter 2 with him professing his faith. And 2 sentences later, he says, God is the Lord over kings. 2 sentences later, check out what happens. In Daniel 3, verse 1, it says, King Nebuchadnezzar, this is so funny, made a gold statue. Who's the gold statue of? Most scholars think it's of Nebuchadnezzar himself. He made a gold statue 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide and set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Then a herald shouted, people of all races and nations and languages, bow to the ground and worship King Nebuchadnezzar's gold statue. Anyone who refuses to obey will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace. That escalated quickly. It's like, what? Wait, what? Nebuchadnezzar? That's so random. This guy just said he's the Lord of Kings, and then here we are. But honestly, I sort of relate to that because I've had these aha moments of faith where I'm like, I will never Never wander away from God. And then I just start putting myself before God, right? God's the Lord of kings. He's my Lord, but then I'm sort of above him, right? I mean, God, if you don't give me what I want, if you don't give me a son, if you don't give me a spouse, if you don't hear my prayer, if you don't heal this person that I love who's sick, then I'm out, God, because I'm God over you, even though I said I'd never do that. And you might know the rest of the story, you might not. But the Jewish boys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, refuse to bow down to the statue. They hold their ground, and they're thrown into a furnace. And right before they get thrown in, and I love this, I love their faith, and this is like usually where you preach when you're talking about standing firm for your faith. I mean, I could do the whole series on this. I elected not to. I have done it in the past, but if we are thrown into a blazing furnace, the God whom we serve is able to save us. He will rescue us from your power, your majesty. And I love that they're respectful. You know, they don't use name calling, they don't whatever, but they say, we're not going to do it. Our God will rescue us. It's great faith. And then I love this next line. It says, but even if he doesn't. But even if he doesn't, and I want us to have that kind of faith, a but even if he doesn't kind of faith, even if he doesn't hear my prayer, even if he doesn't give me the life of my dreams, even if he doesn't do the thing that I want him to do, we want to make it clear to you, your majesty, that we will never serve your gods or worship the gold statue you set up. And so they do get thrown into the furnace. And God does rescue them. He sends an angel to rescue them. They call it the fourth man in the fire. Some of you have heard that line before. And check out Nebuchadnezzar's response, right? He sees this miracle. It's another moment. It says, then Nebuchadnezzar said, praise to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He sent his angel to rescue his servants who trusted in him. They defied the king's command. They were willing to die rather than serve or worship any god except their own. Therefore, I make this decree. If any people, whatever race or nation or language, speak a word against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, this is like PG here, I'm sorry. This is why we have kids men. They will be torn limb from limb, and their houses will be turned into heaps of rubble. There is no God who can rescue like this. It's another miracle in another profession. I will never again turn from God. I will never doubt God. I will never, ever put myself before God. I'll worship only him. Nebuchadnezzar, he's like, I'm going to go to church every week. I mean, I'm done serving me and my things. God is before everything. Money, sports, TV, beauty, achievement, dating, sex life. They're all second after God. And so many of us have had a moment like that. I don't know what it was for you. Maybe you're in a church service. Maybe you're listening to a podcast. Maybe you're just in a conversation at a concert. And God just intersects with your life and you feel his presence. You know he's real. And you think, I will never put myself before God again. That's Nebuchadnezzar's life. And he's so relatable, right? He has another gnarly dream. And he goes to Daniel, and Daniel interprets the dream. And he says, look, God has given you this supernatural dream in his mercy and kindness because he knows that you still struggle with putting yourself ahead of God in your life. And he says, if you do it again, God is going to give a consequence in your life. You're going to lose your kingdom. You need to stop it. And Nebuchadnezzar's like, thank you for this warning. I will never put myself ahead of God. Like I hear it. It's so good. Thank you for the warning. Got it. Message received. Let's see how that went. 12 months later, he was taking a walk on the flat roof of his royal palace in Babylon. And this one is so relatable. What he's about to do, I find it so relatable. It says, as he looked out across the city, he said, look at this great city of Babylon. By my own mighty power, I've built this beautiful city as my royal residence to display my majestic splendor. And how often do we do that? Some of you guys, you're really successful, and it's easy just to look out at your life, at your little kingdom. Look at my 10 acres with my FBI pole building, with heated drain floors, full of side-by-sides. Look at the farm fields and look at my house with up and down siding and black trim and the lights over the garage doors that go like this. And look what I built and whatever. And while these words were still in his mouth, a voice called down from heaven, O King Nebuchadnezzar, this message is for you. You are no longer ruler of this kingdom. Isn't it unreal? How this guy who saw all these miracles just falls back into it over and over and over again. And I love too, it's a reminder, God is in charge of who's in control. right? I mean, he is the one who selects. Nebuchadnezzar was king, and he said, guess what? You're done, you're out. And the king saw these miracles, and he said, never again. Now, eventually, some of you might not know this, but at the end of chapter 4, he comes back to God. Chapter 4 ends, Daniel chapter 4 ends with Nebuchadnezzar professing his faith in God. I believe that Nebuchadnezzar dies and is in the presence of God. He's in heaven right now. He dies loving God. But Daniel chapter 5, this is interesting. It becomes clear that his grandkids, his grandson Darius, does not follow God. Daniel chapter 6 too, because of his waffling. And that is so often the casualty of a waffling faith, isn't it? What we do is our faith waffles. It goes up and down, and middle age, we wander away, and then we come back again when we're empty nesters. But by then it's too late, and our grandkids, our kids, they have a tepid faith because of our tepid faith. And our grandkids are not inspired, and they're gone. And that's what happens to Nebuchadnezzar. And I find this story deeply convicting and so relatable. Nebuchadnezzar's idolatry is the struggle in American society today. We're not like the Jewish boys facing firing squads in prison. Maybe at worst, we're facing a lost promotion or lost job, but nothing like the fiery furnace. I think American culture today is collapsing, and it's not happening because Christians won't boldly stand for your faith. I mean, I see many of you are taking bold stands when it's truly threatened. But how often in our life has that happened? No. Culture is collapsing today because of the incredibly common tendency we all have to have moments of clarity where we love God so much, but we just slip back into prioritizing ourselves first and our own earthly lives ahead of him. And that's what Nebuchadnezzar did. And this is what we do too. This for sure is my story. I can remember a half dozen times where I saw God. I remember when I was 15 at Christmas at my atheist Uncle Dave's house. And I remember realizing one of those moments, something doesn't come from nothing. Intelligent design doesn't come from no intelligence. And I realized for sure, 100%, that God was real. That atheism was a science and fact-denying empty philosophy. And I remember just my stomach dropping, just like Nebuchadnezzar. I thought, from here on out, I will never again. He is the Lord of kings, the Lord of lords. God is real. There is no God but the God of the Bible. I'm going to church. I'm building his kingdom. I'm talking about him everywhere. And then it just slipped away. Over the course of time, I just prioritized different things ahead of God. I never denied God. I never said, oh yeah, I'm done following God. But you look back just a year later, 12 months later, and I'm taking credit for everything in my life. And God is now a servant to serve me. I mean, it's just what happens. I was gone just like that. And what I realized is that Nebuchadnezzar's story, it's my story. In fact, I think it's our story for a lot of us. I feel like so many of us, our faith is usually pretty self-focused. We put ourselves first, and it's punctuated by these moments of spiritual clarity, these moments where we see God, but they're few and far between. And the rest of our life, really, it's just worship of ourselves. God is here as a servant to me rather than me here to serve God. I used to be able to counsel people a lot more, but this is the number one story I get in those sessions. Number one. What do they always say? I grew up in church. I loved God, I served him, and I said, I'll never wander away. And then in college, what happens? You wander away. That's what happens. I chose my own things more than God, and then I came back to God when I had young kids, right? Isn't that what we do? We come back, why? And not everybody's blessed with kids, but when you are blessed with babies, it's like the hardest thing ever. They're like vampires. It suck the life out of you, and it's so hard. And they're great. They are blessings from God, but they break you. Right? And you come to God on your knees like, God, please rescue me, and you have this spiritual awakening and you love God and you think, I'll never wander away again. This time I mean it for surezies. But then middle school and activities comes and, busy, lake life, hobbies, vacations, family, and we choose our own things ahead of God, and just slowly over the course of time, we become our own God, and God, serves us again. What happens? Your kids grow up, your body starts to betray you, and it's like, uh-oh. I better get back in, I'm not long for this world. I better get back to God. And you love God, but you're praying for your grandkids because it's a coin flip, right? Because that's what happens with a waffling faith through the generations. And this is our culture. It's the up-down regression of American Christianity. We're never forced away. Nobody wakes up and says, you know what? I think today's a great day to deconstruct. Well, not nobody, but very few people. What happens is we just slowly, because of our wealth and power and freedom, Just like Nebuchadnezzar, we float away. We float away. And this by far is the prevailing tendency of American Christianity. Our generation after generation faith, what happens? It loses a percentage of each generation, just like Nebuchadnezzar. He died following God, but his grandkids were gone. And some of you, you don't oscillate. And I have so much respect for you, but I know even so, this is still a temptation for all of us. So I want to call our church to stand for Christ in a collapsing culture. A culture that I see oscillating and waffling back and forth with the things of God. I want us to live consistent and faithful, steadfast and unwavering. The last part of this message series is recognizing that our faith will probably not regress when facing a firing squad. Instead, it collapses with the temptations of prioritizing ourselves and our lives ahead of God's. In between the moments of miraculous spiritual clarity that we have, just like Nebuchadnezzar. That's our life. And I wrote down 3 ways to overcome this. 3 ways. And I encourage you to write these down. I know a lot of you guys, you got memories that are steel traps. You're like, Pastor, I don't need to write it down. I can remember my whole fantasy football lineup. I can remember this. I got it. The ladies, can you write it down for them for when they forget it? Thank you. Number 1, consistent time with God. To me, this is more than just reading our Bibles. Obviously, doing a Bible plan and praying, super important. It's good. But it's more like, yes, do that. But it's creating a godly life. Engaged with church, engaged with a godly circle of influence, through life group, through serving, consistent church engagement. I've been to church for most of my life, and I know that families that are consistent in attending, serving, and giving are consistent in following Christ generation after generation. Here's what I mean by consistent. It's got to be like 45 plus Sundays if you want to be really consistent in a way that is compelling for the next generation. And I've watched our church really bucking the national trends here. First.church, you guys are so faithful. I see so many of you. I see you coming from the lake early and building travel and hobbies and things around the things of God, prioritizing God first. And I love it. You're building a legacy of faithfulness for the next generation. Good job. But I think this is where Nebuchadnezzar failed. He had blips of God is great, but he didn't build his life consistently around the things of God. You got to be consistent in your time with God. Second thing, and this is another thing that I love, but I think you got to create a long-term picture. A long-term picture. Here's what I mean. A long-term picture is a vision. It's a vision. The reason so many of us get inconsistent is we fail at creating that long-term vision. The long-term picture helps give you clarity in the short term, why what you're doing in the short term is important in the long term. When Kristen and I first got married, our long-term picture was very clear, and it's still the same 15 years later. It's all of our grandchildren passionately following Christ without exception. That's our long-term picture. And that's easier said than done, but that is what we're going for. That's the goal. And this is the picture we're aiming at to create with our lives. And this makes it so much easier in the short term to be faithful because we see the why in the long term. And honestly, I think most of us have a pretty similar picture. I know some of you who are unmarried or perhaps you don't have kids, you still have a similar picture. It's in living a life of profound faithfulness, inspiring others, even through the end of your days. Living a life of profound faithfulness that inspires others even through the end of your days. We're not just trying to follow God. We're following God with so much tenacity and focus because we know that only that kind of faith will inspire the next generation. And this is why Nebuchadnezzar's legacy died with his kids. Because Nebuchadnezzar, he was thinking short term. He never made a long-term picture. I saw God do a miracle. Everybody follow God or I'll tear you limb from limb. Now what's for dinner? It wasn't, hey, how can I make it so that my dynasty is following Christ 100 years from now? And third thing, once you make the picture, is consult that picture with short-term decisions, And this is the biggest one, right? I love making that long-term picture. It removes decision fatigue in the short term. Some of you, you guys don't like making choices. I get tired from making choices all day long. When I have that long-term picture, oh my goodness, I already know what I'm gonna do in the short term. I don't have to sit here and worry about it. I've already decided. I've already painted the picture. When we're making choices, we just go back to that picture. Recently, my kids have gotten out of the baby stage and they're now at the you can leave them at home alone stage, which is amazing. It's a Christmas miracle. I did not know that I had all this built-in help at home. I mean, they're doing laundry, they're cleaning the house. It's amazing. And, several of my kids, they want to do a lot of things and reasons, and I love it. Like when I was a kid, I liked getting ribbons and medals. You know what I love is my kids getting ribbons and medals. It's like addictive. It truly is. I'm like, this is amazing. It's my favorite thing. But every time a good opportunity comes up, the question we've been asking is, does this lead to the long-term picture that we want? All of our grandkids passionately following Christ without exception. These last few months, we've had some of our circle pressing us to let our daughter Isabel participate in something. It's a really good thing, and she'd be great at it. She's got a killer instinct. She'd be awesome. And she wants to do it real bad. Mommy, Daddy, please, let me do it. But when we look at her heart in particular, and this isn't for everybody, some people can do this stuff and it's great. But when we look at her heart, we know that her biggest issue is going to be to try to do everything in life. And rather than becoming best at prioritizing what's most important, we see that our grandchildren in her line specifically are going to go to church when there's time, and they'll likely have a mediocre faith if we don't train her now with the discipline of saying no to what's less important so she can say yes to what matters most. And that's part of our training. For others of us, this might be prioritizing a life group for your kids or for your family, because you recognize, hey, we're easily influenced, right? And we just have this tendency and we need to prioritize this thing, or because that's the picture that we want. Maybe it's helping rebuild our youth ministries to give our kids the experience of helping shape something and pointing our kids to a lifetime of kingdom leadership and faithfulness to churches, right? And because I don't want my kids just to be a part of a church when it's going good. I want them to be a part of it through thick and thin. Sometimes it's committing to so many Sundays a year or building a life financially where you can prioritize giving. But it's making decisions now that lead to the picture that you want later. And this is a discipline that we practice. We train our families to do it. We bring them into it. We help our kids see it. And look, guys, standing for Christ in a collapsing culture today, sometimes there are these, big scary moments. And I've gotten a lot of emails recently from you guys, and I've been praying for you, and I love it. I love it when you reach out to me for prayer about stuff like this and share your stories with me. But there's been a lot of crazy work trainings that have required particularly young men to deny their faith or be fired. And I want you to know I see it. I understand. Like you are, in that sense, like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. I get it. And I'm praying for you, and my heart is with you. And that happens. I don't want to deny that. But I think by far the most common thing that is getting our legacies is 1,000 little choices, just like Nebuchadnezzar, that lead us to a place where God is forgotten. And today I'm asking you to be consistent in your time with God, to create a long-term picture and to consult that picture with the little choices in your life. And I think, today is you leave church, you're all gonna have nuggets to chew on. You're all gonna have good discussion. Even if you're not a Christian, I want us to spend time really thinking, am I consistent with the things that matter most? I dare ask your people, hey, what's our long-term picture? If they don't know, that's on you. You're a leader. And let's start consulting that picture. Some of you guys, you've got some big choices coming up, and what are we gonna do? And what should we do in this thing and whatever. I want us to consult the long-term picture. It makes it so much easier in the short term. I don't want to just tell you, stand for Christ in a collapsing culture. I want to equip you with practical tools you can apply to your life. And I just can't wait to see what God does for our families. I think today, God is gonna give us some reprioritization as families. I think he's gonna establish a legacy today that will allow some of you to see all of your grandchildren passionately following Christ without exception. There's gonna be young couples today. You're setting it up today so that we can really see a generation after generation faith. I'm praying for it. I'm praying for the discussions with you. I can't wait to see what God does. At all of our locations, I wanna invite you to stand to your feet, and I'd like to have a prayer for you. God in heaven, I thank you that you're the God of evidence, the God of logic and wisdom. I thank you that you make a way that is so simple and clear by grace through faith in Christ. God, today I ask that you give our families eyes to see the vision that you have for our life. Would you give us eyes to see the vision, the picture that you want us to live? And then would you give us discipline to live in a way that leads us to that picture, even in the short choices, the short-term choices in our lives? Would you bless discussions? Would you bless conversations? Would you make our church a steadfast, unwavering pillar of faith in our respective communities? Would you give us the joy of seeing generation after generation that loves you without exception, Lord? I thank you for your hand on our lives. It's in Jesus' name we pray. All God's people said, amen.